At first glance, the 1080 version 14 looks like a minor upper update to make this shoe match the rest of the Fresh Foam lineup. But there's more to this update than meets the eye. This is the New Balance 1080 version 14, and it's time to take it for a run. Yo, what's going on? My name is Kofuzi and I'm a non-elite runner who reviews running shoes here on YouTube. And today I want to talk to you guys all about the 1080 version 14. Before I give you my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that I bought myself and nobody's paying me to make this video or to include their brand in this video. And no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the New Balance 1080 version 14. And let's start with the specs. This is a 38mm stack height shoe with a 6mm drop, giving us 32mm of Fresh Foam X midsole foam in the forefoot. Now that looks and sounds pretty similar to what we saw in last year's 1080 version 13, but there are some differences that New Balance highlights for us and tells us about. The first thing that they tell us about is that there is increased forefoot stiffness in this shoe and that there's more rubber added to high wear areas. And while both of those things sound pretty nice, to me those are a little bit of a red flags, because while it sounds like adding more rubber to increase durability sounds like a great thing, it doesn't have zero performance effect. And increased forefoot stiffness sounds good, but that also could mean that the foam is less bouncy or that the foam feels more firm. The other change for this shoe is that it has a new engineered mesh. I do think that the upper redesign looks fantastic. The mesh and the materials that they're using on the upper of the 1080 feel very comfortable, nice and stretchy, very airy, and there isn't a crazy amount of padding on the tongue or in the heel cup of the shoe. So I feel like the upper is very well designed. I went true to size for my 1080 version 14 and that worked out really well for me. Altogether, New Balance tells us that this shoe comes in at 10.4 ounces, but they're reporting that for a US men's size 9.5, which is not reference size. I happen to be reference size US men's size 9. And for me, my shoe came in at a measured weight of just at 10 ounces and 286 grams. Now that we've talked about what the shoe is like on paper, let's talk about what it's like on the roads. The 1080 version 14 looks like it should feel pretty similar to the 1080 version 13, which I absolutely loved. But this is a very different shoe, which is surprising, mainly because they do look so similar, and I really wasn't expecting all that much of a difference from 13 to 14. The 1080 version 14 feels a bit more firm. The 1080 version 14 feels a bit more stable, and those are the things that New Balance told us it was trying to do with the increased forefoot stiffness and by adding more rubber to high wear areas. Now, a visual inspection of these two shoes makes it very hard to figure out kind of why these two shoes feel so different, but I think it comes down to a couple of things. One, I think that the shape of the midsoles is a little bit different between these two shoes. I think that there's a little bit more width to the footprint, not the shape of the upper around your foot, but the footprint of the shoe itself, like how much space it takes when your foot hits the ground. I think it's a little bit wider, especially to the lateral side or the outside of your foot. I think the ideal with that is that it's going to give you more of a landing pad to land on when your foot hits the ground. And so if you are landing a little bit to the side or tending to roll a little bit to one side or another, there's a little bit more foam to serve as kind of like a bumper pad. Increases the feeling of stability, but makes it feel a little bit less lively of a foam. And the other thing that I suspect that New Balance has done here is tinker with the chemistry of the midsole foam here. Even though both of these shoes say Fresh Foam X on the side, that doesn't mean that it's the exact same material that's used in the midsoles. And I think this year they have firmed up and made a little bit more dense the midsole foam that's in the 1080 version 14. And I think that's consistent with what they've told us explicitly about this shoe, that it's intended to have a stiffer forefoot. I think they've done it in these two ways with both geometry and with chemistry. Now, don't get me wrong, I think this is a pretty good shoe. The foam gives a really good amount of impact absorption when your foot hits the ground. It compresses nicely and then bounces back a little bit, not quite as much as I would like. I feel like there's a dampened response to it. So you're hitting the foam and it kind of just stays there. I'm not getting a lot of bounce back. The positive of that kind of sensation is that for people who need more stability in their shoes, it's going to feel a lot more predictable with each step. And also, depending on how your foot hits the ground, the new way that they've made the 1080/14 may feel softer and more cushioned for you, whereas for me, it feels like it's a little bit firmer and less exciting to run in. Now, before we wrap up this video, let's take a moment to zoom out and see where the 1080 fits within the broader New Balance lineup. Now, New Balance is one of, I think, the first brands or one of the earlier brands to very explicitly adopt a two parallel lines of product strategy when it comes to their running shoes. And so you've got a daily trainer like the 1080 version 14, which uses Fresh Foam X. And you've also got other daily trainers from New Balance that use a different kind of foam and are trying to deliver a different kind of experience and target a different kind of runner, or at least a different kind of running. And these are shoes that are indicated because of the fact that they have a different foam name called Fuel Cell. And now, normally when I have kind of two parallel lines of shoes with the brand, I go through and say like, well, this is what the daily trainers are, this is what the racing shoes are, this is what the max cushion shoes are, and recovery shoes are, and kind of go through it line by line. And I've recently done that, and I'll post a link to the video where I've done that with New Balance. But I think here, to better understand the 1080, it might be beneficial to kind of zoom out even a little bit further and kind of do a little bit of a history lesson. So before there was like a Fuel Cell line, New Balance used to name all their shoes using a numbering system. This is the New Balance 880. This is a couple of years old, but it'll serve our purpose for the discussion here today. So the 80 in the 880 or the 80 in the 1080 indicates that it was a neutral shoe. There are shoes that end in 60 that indicate they're stability shoes, and there's other two-digit suffixes that exist in the New Balance lineup. And then the first digit, the 8 or the 10, indicates kind of the level of technology that's in the shoe. So like the 8 was kind of like the, not bare bones technology, because there's a 6 and a 5 and a 4. Again, those aren't really used anymore except in some of the streetwear category, but in terms of running, they're still using the 8, and this is the base level 880 running shoe that you use for daily training. It's a workhorse kind of shoe that you could use for most of your running most of the time, like any daily trainer, and it's built to be durable enough to handle all of that. Then the way that the 1080 fit in is that it's a shoe that is like the 880, but there's just a bit more technology. Now, keep in mind that this shoe is on its 14th generation, and back when it started, having more foam wasn't necessarily conceived of as being more technology, back when everything was pretty much all EVA. And so it had lots of other things, stability elements, weird things going on in the rubber outsoles. It had more technology, so it wasn't necessarily a max cushion shoe, but that's kind of an easier way to understand it. It was like a max version of the 880. And then about 5 years ago, we've got the Fresh Foam X More, and this is the More version 5, and this was very clearly a max cushion shoe. I mean, really, if you wanted to keep with the numbering system, I guess New Balance could have called it like the 1280 if they wanted to, because then you'd have 8, 10, and 12, and you get kind of a sense that these are all intended to be daily trainers of sorts. There's just more stuff until you get all the way to the kind of far end of that spectrum with the More version 5. Now, starting with 1080 version 10, which is the first version that I really paid attention to, and I absolutely love that one. That one predated the More, I believe, or maybe it was right around the same time, but that shoe felt like a max cushion shoe to me. It was really big, really cushioned, and it felt like you were getting a little bit of a speed penalty for all that comfort, but it was just a really enjoyable shoe to run in. After the appearance of the More, which was now a max cushion shoe, they couldn't really have two max cushion shoes. And so over the years, from the 1080 version 10, which lasted for about a year and a half, almost 2 years, to the 11, 12, 13, which became a very fun, pure daily trainer, we got the 14, which is a little bit more max-ish, but still very much a daily trainer, but more cushioned than the 880. So it's really kind of like not a max cushion shoe, not a daily trainer. It's kind of fitting somewhere in between. I'll call it a well-cushioned daily trainer. And that's how I'm really understanding the 1080. But something that I'm also understanding based on the changes that I've seen in all of these shoes over the years, and especially in the updates that we saw in 2024, is that the whole Fresh Foam X series of shoes, the 880, 1080, and the more, and all the shoes that are using Fresh Foam X in part of the running lineup, seem to be targeting a very different runner than the shoes that we're seeing on the fuel cell side of the spectrum, with the daily trainer of the Rebel, the racing shoe of the SC Elite version 4, and then kind of the long run slash max cushion shoe, and maybe a marathon racer for some people, the SC Trainer version 3. It seems like what they're doing over at New Balance is kind of separating their product lines, whereas before I felt like New Balance diehards were mixing and matching quite a bit in terms of which shoes they liked. They liked some fuel cell shoes and some Fresh Foam X shoes. But now I feel like the difference between these shoes is becoming so much bigger that there's really becoming very two distinct camps. And I feel like the Fresh Foam X line is really starting to target some of the run walkers, or maybe pure walkers, people that just want a comfortable shoe, or people who are bigger, taller than me. My bigger, taller friends, I think, are going to appreciate the fact that these foams are firmer, so it's going to be able to absorb the impact and react with their foot strikes in a way that is a little bit more pleasant to them, whereas I might be kind of still just kind of skirting at the top of the midsole foam. Those types of athletes and those types of users, that seems to be what the Fresh Foam X series of shoes, it seems to be targeting. The shoes are less kind of dynamic in terms of the response of the foam, and they're much more predictable, much more stable. The footprints are all getting wider, and the uppers are getting much more kind of comfy and luxurious. The uppers are really, really nice without being excessively puffy. A lot of other brands should take note on that. So I feel like they're doing something really nice over here on the Fresh Foam X side, but it's just a line of shoes that is starting to make less and less sense for what I personally like. And I'm starting to really like the fuel cell line of shoes more and more, and finding myself existing kind of on this side of the spectrum more and more, based on the fact that I like chaotic shoes. I like it when shoes squish a lot and then bounce back really quickly and in a really fun way. So those are the kinds of shoes that I'm really looking forward to and I'm really finding exciting. Neither one of these is right or wrong. All these shoes, I think, are doing really well in the marketplace, but this is really one of the biggest rifts in terms of parallel product lines that I see across brands, and I feel like this rift is getting even bigger, and that's basically how I am understanding New Balance as we head into 2025. Now let's wrap up the video by going over the buying guide, and we'll talk about some alternatives that you'll want to consider. The 1080 version 14 is a well-cushioned daily trainer that is both comfortable and stable. But at $165 retail price, I feel like it's a touch on the expensive side for a shoe that I feel is a little bit more boring than last year. You can still get last year's 1080 version 13, and that's the one that I'm currently preferring. That shoe retailed at $160, I believe, but now you can find it on a discount at $130, and I think that's a tremendous value. But if either of those two shoes isn't for you, here's two others that I think you should consider. I think the other shoe that lines up really well against the 1080 version 14 is from Saucony, and that's the Triumph 22. And I think that these two shoes have undergone a lot of the same changes from year over year. Both of these shoes seem to have gotten wider in the footprint in order to increase stability, and both of these shoes are tall but still feel a little bit on the firm side despite the amount of cushion that they have. There is a little bit of a discount to get to the Triumph 22 compared to the 1080 though for this year, because the Triumph 22 comes in at $160. And then the last shoe that I want to talk about today is the shoe that I think that all of these shoes are really trying to target, and that's from Brooks. This is the Glycerin 21. I feel like this is a shoe that sells really well, but it's not exactly a shoe that suits a lot of my preferences. Again, it's one of those shoes that is very wide in the footprint. It's got a bunch of rubber for lots of durability, and it's a little bit firmer than you would think it would be based on the way it looks and the amount of foam that you've got inside the shoe. And while I'm personally not the target audience for this shoe, there are definitely a lot of runners out there who love it. And normally it's $160, but now since it's been out for a while and the Glycerin 22 is on the horizon, you can get the Glycerin 21 for $130, and that is a fantastic price. So those are my thoughts on the 1080 version 14. A lot of very subtle tweaks that ended up making a very big difference in the shoe. If you have any more questions about it or any of the other shoes that I talked about today, feel free to put them in the comments down below, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do Mondays and Thursdays over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel. I'd love to talk to you guys over there in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you're staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?